A lone figure was moving down the Khumbu Icefall like someone who knew the route. Slow, deliberate, almost polite with each step. No panic. No wasted motion. The headlamp was dead. The goggles were gone, and the wind was chewing at his face like it had teeth. Yet he walked as if the mountain itself was guiding him. When the Sherpa team reached him, he didn't collapse. He didn't plead. He didn't even ask where he was. He looked at the nearest climber and said one sentence, quiet, hoarse, perfectly clear. I came back. That should have been impossible, because the man's name had been printed on memorial boards and spoken in base camp whispers for years. Disappeared high on the mountain, no body recovered, no radio contact, no final call. Just gone. The kind of disappearance Everest is famous for. But there he was, alive, barely, wearing a shredded suit from an older expedition era, with straps and buckles no one used anymore. His gloves were wrong. His harness was wrong. Even the way he clipped carabiners looked like muscle memory from another decade. At base camp, they tried to warm him, feed him, question him. They asked the same thing over and over. Where have you been? He stared into the stove flame as if it was a doorway. And then he said something that turned the tent into a grave. I wasn't missing. I was kept. The wind outside snapped the fabric. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else swore they heard a faint radio crackle, though every channel was quiet. The man lifted his eyes, and for the first time they saw what was wrong. His pupils didn't track faces the way a human's should. They tracked distance, like he was still watching the summit. And when they asked him the date, he answered without hesitation, naming a year that ended long ago. The story you just heard is a fictional narrative created for entertainment. Everest is not just a mountain. It's a vault of oxygen, of ambition, of last words that never reach home. Up there, the line between lost and taken can be as thin as a torn glove. And the cold has a way of preserving secrets the way a freezer preserves food, perfectly, brutally, without mercy. In today's story, you're going to follow an expedition team that believes they're prepared for anything. Crevasses, avalanches, altitude sickness, the icefall's moving labyrinth. But nothing in their training will explain what happens when Everest appears to give someone back. Someone who should not be alive, someone whose disappearance was already accepted as a final chapter. Because survival isn't the only mystery here. Memory is, time is, and the closer they get to the truth, the more the mountain begins to feel less like a place and more like a presence. Something that watches, something that waits, something that decides who leaves and who stays. Before we begin, I want to know where you're watching from. What country, what city, what corner of the world found you today? Drop it in the comments because these stories travel farther than any expedition ever could. And if you enjoy intense exploration narratives, realistic, immersive, and built to keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure you subscribe, leave a like, and stay with us until the final moment. Because what happens on Everest doesn't always end on Everest. Base camp never truly slept. Even at night, even when headlamps clicked off one by one and tents became dark lumps pressed into the glacier, the place still breathed, stoves hissing, nylon snapping, wind rolling down valley like a living thing. It was a restless kind of silence, the kind that made you listen harder than you wanted to. I was there because I'd promised myself I'd stop making films about other people's danger and finally step into my own. That was the lie I used to justify the expense, the training, the months of preparation. The truth was simpler. I needed to prove I was still capable of doing something hard without an edit button. My name is Owen Kessler, 42, former combat medic turned expedition documentarian. I'd spent years filming mountains from safe distances, glaciers from helicopters, summit bids from long lenses, tragedy from behind a screen. But Everest had always been the one story I avoided because it wasn't cinematic. It was honest. We were 10 days into the rotation, acclimatizing between base camp and Camp 1, when the call came over a handheld radio from a Sherpa team above the icefall. At first it was just breath and static, then a voice, low and urgent, speaking Nepali so fast I only caught fragments. Man, walking, alone, no team. That got everyone moving. Our leader, Lina Sato, was already outside her tent, boots half-laced, jacket open to the cold like she didn't feel it. She was 48, Japanese-American, and had that rare calm that only comes from having been scared too many times. She'd guided on Denali, Aconcagua, K2. She carried herself the way strong rope does, quietly dependable. "What did they say?" I asked, shoving my arms into my down suit. Lena's eyes were sharp, reflecting the headlamp beam. "They said they found a climber descending alone. No oxygen, no support. He's conscious." "That's not possible," muttered Victor Hale, our logistics coordinator. Victor wasn't a climber in the romantic sense. He was a numbers man. Permits, weather windows, oxygen caches. He looked at Everest like an equation, and equations don't include random men walking out of the icefall. "Unless it's a rescue case from another team," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Lena shook her head. "No one reported missing this season." The word season did something strange to my stomach. It reminded me how quickly tragedy gets categorized here, like the mountain is a calendar and people are dates. We moved to the comms tent where the radio sat on a folding table, wrapped in duct tape, like it was holding itself together. A Sherpa named Tenzing, one of ours, was already there, listening. The voice on the radio returned, clearer now. "We are bringing him down. He is wrong." Lena leaned close to the mic. "Wrong how? Injured? Confused?" A pause. Static. Wind. Then, "Old gear, very old. He says he came back." Victor scoffed before he could stop himself. "Old gear? Someone's playing games." Tenzing didn't laugh. He stared at the radio like it had insulted his family. "Not game," he said quietly. "Icefall does not make jokes." That was the first time I felt the story turning into something else. Not a rescue, not an accident, something with weight. When the Sherpa team reached base camp at dawn, the light was thin and grey, as if the sun was reluctant to touch anything. People emerged from tents and gathered in a semicircle, careful not to get too close. Not out of fear of disease or violence, but because the mountain had taught everyone the same superstition. When something impossible happens, don't rush it. Let it reveal itself. They came in single file, crampons crunching on glacial rock. 2 Sherpas supported the man between them. He walked, but not like someone exhausted, more like someone navigating a dream. At first glance, he looked like any climber pulled back from the edge, ice in the beard, lips cracked, face swollen from cold. Then I saw the suit. It was an older model, faded red and black, the kind you'd see in photos from the early 2000s. The zipper was metal, not the newer plastic teeth. The patches were stitched, not heat-sealed. His harness was a relic, bulky, overbuilt. And his boots. His boots made my skin tighten. Double plastic boots yellowed with age. No one used those anymore unless they couldn't afford modern gear or were deliberately going retro. But there was no retro on Everest. Up here, old gear wasn't a fashion choice. It was a death wish. They sat him on a camp chair near the medical tent. A medic from another team, an Austrian woman named Greta, pushed through the crowd, gloves already on. "Frostbite assessment first," she said, brisk, professional. She leaned in, lifted his gogglesless face, clicked a penlight in his eyes. The man didn't flinch at the light. He didn't blink normally. His gaze slid past her shoulder, past all of us, to the wall of ice beyond base camp, as if he was still reading the mountain's surface. "What's your name?" Greta asked in English. His lips moved. A sound came out that could have been a name, but it cracked apart halfway, swallowed by his throat. He tried again. Eli." Lena's posture changed instantly, just a fraction, but I saw it. She'd recognized something. Greta nodded. Eli, can you tell me your last known location? Camp 2? Camp 3? The man's eyes shifted, slow and deliberate, like he was picking the right shelf in his mind. Above, the balcony, he said. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The balcony was high, around 8,400 meters, a place where you stopped to change oxygen bottles, where the world narrowed to a thin strip of snow and the sound of your own breathing. People didn't casually wander above it and then stroll back down days later without oxygen. Greta frowned. When were you above the balcony? He answered without hesitation. May 23rd. Victor looked around, confused. That could be last season. Or, then Tenzing said softly, he is not from this season. Lena stepped forward. Eli what? She asked. The man's eyes finally found a human face. Lena's. Eli Rourke, he said. The name hit the camp like a falling rock. It was small at first, just a few people stiffening, turning to each other, then more. A Brit climber near me whispered, no, that can't be. I didn't know the name, but I knew the reaction. This wasn't just a missing climber. This was a ghost. Lena turned sharply to Victor. Satellite link, now. Look it up. Victor hesitated, then jogged toward the communications tent. Greta continued her exam, gently pulling back the man's sleeves. His wrists were raw where straps had rubbed. His fingers, his fingers, too, were blackened at the tips, but the rest were pale and stiff, not the deep blue I expected. How long since you ate? Greta asked. Eli blinked once. I don't know. Do you remember coming down? He swallowed, and for a moment his face pinched, like he was in pain that wasn't physical. I remember being told to be quiet. The crowd went still. Greta paused. Told by who? Eli's gaze drifted again, away from her, toward the icefall. By the mountain, he said. Victor returned with a tablet, face drained of color. He handed it to Lena. I couldn't see the screen, but I saw Lena's jaw tighten as she read. She looked up at the man like he'd become a problem the size of Everest itself. He disappeared in 2018, Lena said, voice controlled. May 23rd, 2018. 6 years. 6 years missing, presumed dead, now sitting in a camp chair with ice in his eyebrows and a stare that didn't belong to the living. Someone near the edge of the crowd muttered a prayer. Another person backed away, as if Eli might be contagious. Greta's voice softened, but her eyes stayed clinical. Eli, do you know what year it is? He answered immediately. 2018. A few people exhaled like they'd been holding their breath the whole time. Greta looked at Lena. Hypoxia can cause confusion, severe trauma, dissociation. He could be... Eli spoke again, cutting through her explanation. I didn't lose time, he said. Time lost me. No one laughed, not even Victor. They moved him into the medical tent. Lena ordered privacy, but base camp wasn't a place where walls meant anything. The whole camp leaned closer, listening through fabric, through wind. I stood outside with my camera in my hands, not filming. The urge was there, gnawing, but something about this felt wrong to capture, like filming him would seal it into reality. Inside, Greta started an IV. She checked Eli's oxygen saturation, his pulse, his core temp. She tried to get him to drink broth. He sipped mechanically, as if he was doing it because someone had told him he should. Lena sat across from him, posture relaxed, voice gentle. Eli, she said, do you remember your last team? Who you were climbing with? Eli's eyes narrowed like someone squinting into sunlight. I was with Mark, he said, and a guide. Name was... He stopped, throat working. Take your time, Lena said. His fingers twitched as if they were still holding an ice axe. Name was Pemba, he finished and said it like it mattered. Tenzing, standing beside Lena, reacted subtly, just a lift of his eyebrows. Lena noticed. You know that name? Tenzing's voice was low. Many Pemba, but there is story. Victor stepped in, unable to help himself. Eli, if you were missing since 2018, where have you been? Shelter? A cave? Another camp? Eli looked at him for a long time, then spoke so quietly I leaned forward to catch it. I wasn't missing, he said. I was kept. Greta's hands paused mid-adjustment on the IV line. Victor scoffed again, weaker this time. Kept by who? Eli's gaze drifted upward, toward the tent ceiling, as if the fabric could show him the sky. By the ones who live where the wind doesn't stop, he said. A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with cold. In the Himalaya, people told stories of spirits, of guardians, of things that moved in storms. Most climbers treated it like folklore, a way locals explained danger. But in that moment, with a man who'd been dead for 6 years, speaking in a calm, ruined voice, folklore felt less like fiction. Lena leaned in, voice steady. Eli, did someone physically restrain you? Did you see other people? Eli's lips parted. For the first time, fear flickered across his face. I saw lights, he whispered. Not headlamps, not stars, lights that come from inside the ice. Victor snorted, but it died in his throat when Eli continued. And I heard my radio, Eli said. Even when it was turned off, it kept calling my name like someone had my voice. Greta glanced at Lena. Lena didn't move. Eli's eyes sharpened, focusing suddenly like a camera locking onto a target. It doesn't want us up there, he said. Not this year. Not now. Lena exhaled slowly. Eli, you're safe here. His head turned toward her so fast it startled me. No, he said, and the certainty in it made the tent feel smaller. I'm not safe. I'm returned. Outside, the wind hit the tent hard enough to make the poles creak, and in that exact moment, every radio in base camp, every handheld, every base station crackled once, like a single breath passing through them. People froze, then silence again. Victor stared toward the comms tent as if he'd seen a ghost. Eli didn't react like it surprised him. He only looked down at his hands and whispered something I almost didn't hear. It's listening. Lena stood up abruptly. Greta, keep him stable. Tenzing, with me. Victor, check comms logs. Owen. She looked at me for the first time like she remembered I existed. Don't film him. Not yet. I nodded, throat dry. As Lena stepped out of the medical tent, the crowd backed away instinctively. She moved through them, expression controlled, but her eyes were distant, as if she'd just been handed a map with new lines drawn in blood. I followed at a respectful distance to the comms tent. Victor was already inside, flipping through channels, checking batteries, looking for rational explanations. Tenzing entered behind Lena, and his face had changed. He looked older than he had yesterday. Lena spoke first. Tell me the story you mentioned. Tenzing hesitated, then said, In my village, elders speak of Khumbu Icefall, mountain guardians, not demon, not ghost, something between. They protect places that are not for us. Victor waved a hand like he could swat the idea away. We're not doing myths. We have a missing climber with hypoxia and frostbite. Tenzing didn't flinch. You have climber missing 6 years, not myth. That is fact. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. Lena's voice was quiet. If he's Eli Rourke, then someone, somehow, kept him alive, and he thinks the mountain returned him for a reason. Tenzing nodded once. Sometimes return is warning. Victor leaned over the radio station, tapping the casing. Or it's a con, a delusional climber, a scavenger who found old gear and made a story. Lena stared at Victor. And how did he know the exact date he disappeared? The names, the route, his own missing record? Victor had no answer. I stood there, listening, my mind trying to assemble the pieces into something that made sense. 6 years, no food, no oxygen, no team, yet alive. The rational part of me tried to cling to explanations. misidentification, memory error, unreported survival in a hidden cave, a miracle. But the way Eli had said returned, like a verdict, made miracles feel naive. Tenzing's radio crackled suddenly, just once. A short burst of static followed by a faint sound that almost resembled a human voice, too distorted to understand. Tenzing's eyes widened. He lifted the radio closer to his ear. Lena snapped, "What did you hear?" Tenzing didn't answer immediately. He looked at Victor, then at Lena. Then, in a voice that had lost its calm, he said, "It said my name." A cold emptiness opened in my chest. Victor grabbed the radio. "That's impossible." But the radio remained silent now, innocent again. Lena's gaze slid to me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen before on this mountain. Hesitation, not fear of avalanches or storms, fear of information, fear that knowing more would make it real. She said, "We end our rotation, no movement into the icefall until we understand what this is." Victor protested, "Weather window." Lena cut him off. "We're not pushing into a window if the mountain is sending people back from the dead." Those words shouldn't have been said aloud. Saying them felt like inviting something closer. As if to prove that point, the comms tent radio hissed again, longer this time, and a voice came through, weak, broken, but unmistakably human. Not a Sherpa voice, not Victor's, not Lena's. It was Eli's voice, and it said clearly enough that all three of us heard it, "Owen, don't look up." My blood turned to ice, because Eli was still in the medical tent, and my name had never been spoken into any radio channel. Slowly, against every instinct, I stepped out of the comms tent. The sky above base camp was a flat, cold blue. The icefall loomed like a frozen wave. Wind scraped the glacier. And then I realized why the voice had said not to look up, because the entire camp had gone quiet again. Too quiet. As if everyone at the same time had started holding their breath. And somewhere above us, beyond the ridgeline we couldn't see from here, something heavy shifted in the ice, with the slow patience of something waking. I kept my eyes down, but I could feel it anyway. Nobody at base camp said it out loud, but the rules changed the moment my name came through the radio. In the place built on checklists, oxygen flow rates, rope ladders, weather models, acclimatization schedules, there was suddenly an item nobody could measure, the feeling that something had noticed us. Lena ordered all radios collected and brought to the comms tent. Victor protested, but his voice lacked force now, like even he didn't trust the math anymore. We laid the handhelds on the table in a neat row, batteries out, antennas down, as if we were disarming a line of weapons. "Could be crosstalk," Victor insisted, running his fingers through his hair. "Open mics, someone on another team repeating your name as a joke." "A joke," Lena repeated, and her eyes hardened. "On what channel?" Victor opened his mouth, then stopped. He scrolled through the base station logs, trying to reconstruct the moment. The record showed a burst of transmission. No call sign. No registered frequency. It was like the radio had briefly become a mouth for something that didn't have permission to speak. Tenzing stood very still, hands clasped at his waist. He wasn't looking at the radios. He was looking at the tent door, at the strip of grey light and wind outside, like he expected someone to step in. "Tell me about Eli," Lena said, shifting the conversation back to ground. Victor pulled up the article he'd found. American climber, experienced, attempted Everest in 2018 with a commercial team, disappeared above the balcony during summit push, search called off due to weather and risk. Lena nodded once, eyes distant. "Any photos?" Victor rotated the tablet and held it up. On the screen, a man smiled into the camera. Thinner than the person in the med tent, but the same nose, the same slightly crooked front tooth, the same intense gaze that looked like it was always aiming past the lens. My stomach tightened. "That's him," I said quietly. Victor looked relieved, like a part of him had been desperate for any normal anchor. "So he's real." not some random guy in old gear. Real doesn't explain how, Lena said. We all knew that. The medical tent sat a short walk away, but it felt like a different continent. People had clustered around it earlier, hungry for the spectacle, but Lena cleared them out. Now 2 Sherpas stood outside, not as guards exactly, but as a line the camp understood not to cross. When we stepped in, warmth hit my face, thick with the smell of iodine and stove gas. Greta sat on a crate, charting vitals. Eli lay on a sleeping pad, wrapped in a down blanket, an oxygen mask set loosely near his mouth. His eyes were open, but unfocused, tracking something only he could see. Greta's voice was clipped. Core temp is improving. Oxygen sat still low but stable. Mild frostbite on 2 fingers, superficial on toes. He's dehydrated, but not as badly as he should be if he'd been out there for days. For days, Victor echoed. Greta looked at him sharply. That's the point. His presentation doesn't match the story. Lena knelt near Eli, keeping her body language calm. Eli, I'm going to ask again, and I need you to try. Where were you from 2018 until now? Eli blinked slowly. When he spoke, his voice was stronger than yesterday, but it was still rough, like gravel dragged over metal. Not far, he said. Victor exhaled through his nose. Not far from where? The South Col? A cave? Eli's lips pressed together. For a moment he looked almost annoyed, like we were being childish. You think the mountain is only snow, he said. You think it's empty. Lena kept her tone steady. Eli, people searched for you. You were gone. If you were alive, there had to be shelter, there had to be food. Eli's eyes moved to her face and held there. There was shelter, he said, and there was warmth. Greta stiffened. Warmth where? Eli swallowed. Inside. That single word made my neck prickle. Inside what? Inside a tent? Inside a cave? Or inside something else he couldn't describe without sounding insane? Lena tried a different angle. Do you remember your last normal day? The last thing before you disappeared? Eli stared at the ceiling, as if the memory was written there. Mark was ahead, he said. Pemba was behind. The wind got angry. The rope wasn't where it should be. Victor leaned forward despite himself. Fixed line. Missing? Eli nodded slightly. Gone like it had never been there. Lena's eyes narrowed. Ropes get buried. Cut by ice. It happens. Eli's mouth twitched, almost a smile without warmth. No, not buried. Removed. Tenzing shifted his weight, boots creaking on the plywood floor. Removed by who? He asked softly. Eli's gaze slid toward him, and for the first time I saw recognition in his face. You, Eli whispered. Tenzing froze. Eli lifted a trembling hand, pointing, not accusing, more like identifying a landmark. You were there, Eli said. Not you, but your face. Tenzing's voice dropped. Many men have my face. Eli's fingers curled into the blanket. No, he said. That's what they want you to believe. Greta glanced at Lena, silently asking the same question I was thinking. Is he hallucinating, or is he speaking in metaphors because he doesn't have the language for what happened? Lena stood. We need objective verification, she said. Fingerprints, photos. Contact whoever filed the missing report. If he's Eli Rourke, his family will know. And we check his gear, every pocket, every strap. Victor nodded quickly, eager to return to something procedural. Yes, inventory, chain of custody. Greta frowned. He's a patient, not evidence. Lena met her eyes. He is both. Up here, sometimes you don't get to choose. We moved with care, not like we were looting a body, but like we were handling something fragile that might break if we treated it like a miracle. Greta supervised while Victor and I examined Eli's suit and harness. The fabric was stiff with ice and age. The buckles were scarred. Every strap had the dull wear of years, not days. Then Victor found it. a laminated summit permit tucked into an inner pocket, edges frayed, the ink faded but readable. A 2018 permit card with Eli's name and photo. Victor's breath caught. This is real. He handed it to Lena. Lena stared at it a long moment, then tucked it carefully into a zip pouch like it could tear apart. I kept checking the suit. A pocket on the chest was jammed with something hard. I eased it out slowly. A small camera, not modern, not a GoPro. An older compact, the kind climbers used before everything became action cams. The lens cover was cracked. The body was battered. But it was there, strapped with a piece of cord. Victor's eyes lit up. Memory card? I opened the battery compartment with a fingernail, empty. The SD slot, though, something was inside. Greta's voice sharpened. Do not damage that. Lena held out her hand. Give it to me. I placed the camera in her palm. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She just looked at it like she'd been handed a weapon. Eli watched all of this with unsettling calm. When Lena turned back to him, he spoke again. Quieter. Don't play it, he said. Victor bristled. Why? What's on it? Eli's eyes fixed on Victor. Me, he said. Not the me you're looking at. A silence settled over the tent, heavy as snow load. Lena stepped out with the camera and the permit card. Victor followed. I lingered, drawn to Eli despite every instinct warning me not to get too close. Eli, I said softly, why did you say my name on the radio? His gaze shifted to me, and for the first time he looked tired. Truly tired. I didn't, he whispered. That's how it starts. My mouth went dry. What starts? Eli's eyes flicked toward the tent door. It learns what to call you, he said. Outside, the wind rose again, slapping nylon like a hand impatient on a door. I wanted to tell myself he was delirious. Hypoxia, trauma, brain-weaving stories to make sense of terror. But the radio. My name. I walked out into the cold and found Lena in the comms tent with the laptop open, the SD card in a reader. The screen showed a folder of files, most of them corrupted. Only 3 opened with recognizable thumbnails. Victor leaned over her shoulder. Play it. Lena didn't. Not yet. She enlarged the first thumbnail without opening the video fully. A frozen frame appeared, a close-up of Eli's face, windburned, ice in his beard, eyes wide. Behind him, nothing but white sky. The second thumbnail, a rope line, a slope, boot prints, then a dark smear at the edge of the frame that looked like a shadow, too tall to be a person, standing just outside the camera's focus. My pulse jumped. That could be anything, I said immediately, hating how desperate I sounded. Victor pointed. Zoom in. Lena didn't move. She tapped the third thumbnail instead. A still image loaded, the inside of a tent, or what looked like one, fabric walls, frost, a headlamp beam spilling across gear. Then my eyes found the detail that made my breath stop. A radio on the ground, its display glowing. And on the display, in blocky digital letters, was a word I'd never seen on any handheld in base camp. Owen. Victor whispered, No. Lena's face had gone very still. He didn't know your name when he disappeared, she said, more to herself than to us. I swallowed hard. Maybe the file was altered. Victor shook his head quickly, as if he needed something to deny. By who? We just pulled it from his pocket. Tenzing stepped in quietly, closing the tent flap behind him. You should not watch the video, he said. Victor snapped. You don't get to decide that. Tenzing didn't flinch. I am not deciding. I am warning. Lena finally spoke, voice low and controlled. We will watch it, she said, but not here, not with open comms, and not until we have a plan for what we do with what we learn. Victor threw his hands up. A plan? Lena, come on. This is evidence. It's also a signal, Lena replied. And I don't know who we'd be signaling to. That stopped him. Lena closed the laptop and pocketed the SD card. We verify identity first, she said. Then we decide how much of his story becomes camp gossip. If this spreads, people panic. Panic kills. Victor nodded reluctantly, but I could see it in him now. The same hunger I'd felt earlier, the pull of the impossible. Numbers men don't like mysteries, but they like solving them. We set up a satellite call in the communications tent. The line crackled, lagged, then connected. Victor reached a Nepal liaison, then transferred to an American contact. After a chain of calls and waiting, we got through to someone listed on the missing report, Eli's sister. Her voice was cautious at first, numb in that way grief becomes after years. "This isn't funny," she said. "Who is this?" Lena spoke gently. "Ma'am, my name is Lena Sato. I'm at Everest Base Camp. We have a man here who says he's Eli Rourke." A silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then a sharp inhale. "No," the woman whispered. "No, I buried him in my head. I can't." Victor leaned in, voice quick. "We have his permit card. His face matches the photographs. We need confirmation. Can you tell us something unique? A mark? A phrase? Anything that would confirm identity if we ask him?" Another pause. Then, softer, as if she was speaking to a memory. "He has a scar on his left shoulder. A crescent shape. He got it climbing Rainier. And he used to say, don't bargain with altitude." Lena nodded, eyes closing briefly. "Thank you." We went back to the medical tent. Greta looked irritated to see us. "You're treating him like a case file," she said. Lena kept her voice calm. "We need to ask one more question." Greta exhaled, stepped aside. Lena crouched by Eli. "Eli," she said, "do you have a scar on your left shoulder?" Eli's eyes drifted toward her. "Yes." "Can you show us?" For a moment he didn't move. Then slowly he pulled the blanket aside, unzipped his base layer with stiff fingers, and exposed his shoulder. There it was, a crescent scar, pale against reddened skin, like a moon cut into him. Lena's throat tightened. She looked away quickly, as if emotion would be a weakness the mountain could exploit. "And Eli," Victor said, voice almost trembling, "did you ever say the phrase, 'don't bargain with altitude'?" Eli frowned, thinking. Then his expression softened in a way that hurt to see, like he was briefly becoming human again. "My sister," he whispered. "She used to hate when I said that." Victor turned away, rubbing his eyes hard. It was him. It was really him. And that made everything worse, because now the question wasn't who he was, it was what had been done to him. Night fell early, like it always did. The temperature dropped, hard and fast. The camp felt smaller under the stars, the icefall a black mouth outlined in faint moonlight. Lena gathered our team in the mess tent, a cramped space with benches and a table scarred by years of expeditions. Tenzing sat close to the stove, hands wrapped around a cup he wasn't drinking from. Victor sat opposite him, restless. Greta stood by the door, arms crossed, included only because Lena insisted she should be. I sat at the end, camera on my lap like a useless talisman. Lena spoke first. "We have confirmation from family. He's Eli Rourke. He disappeared May 23rd, 2018. He believes he was kept somewhere on the mountain and returned intentionally." Victor leaned forward. "We have a memory card with corrupted files. 3 usable items. One includes an image of a radio with Owen's name on it." Greta's eyes narrowed. "That's not medical. That's something else." Lena nodded. "Exactly." Tenzing finally spoke, voice low. "When Mountain returns something, it is not gift. It is message." Victor snapped. "A message from what? Spirits? Come on." Tenzing's gaze stayed calm. "From whatever makes men disappear without bodies, and then sends them back with old gear and broken minds." Silence. Lena looked at each of us one by one. "We need to decide what we do next," she said. "Option 1, we evacuate Eli and we end our expedition. We leave the mountain alone." Victor's jaw clenched. "We're weeks into this. Sponsors, permits. We can't just—" Lena raised a hand. "Option 2, We investigate. Carefully, we find out where he came from. Greta shook her head immediately. He's not stable enough to be dragged around as a compass. I'm not talking about using him, Lena said. I'm talking about reading the mountain the way we always do. Tracks, gear, anomalies. If he descended through the icefall, there's a path. There are signs. Victor's eyes lit. Finally, something we can actually do. Tenzing's cup trembled slightly in his hands. You go into icefall now. You go into mouth while it is awake. Victor scoffed, but it sounded thin. We go through the icefall every rotation. Not with returned man in camp, Tenzing replied. Lena looked at Tenzing. What are you afraid of? Tenzing's eyes lifted slowly to her face. Not afraid, he said. Respect. There is difference. Lena exhaled, then turned to me. Owen, you're not climbing lead, but you observe details others miss. If we do a limited recon, short, no heroics, can you do it? My mouth opened, and for a moment I nearly said no. The rational part of me wanted out, but another part, the part that had chased danger through lenses for years, wanted to see the truth with my own eyes. I can, I said, voice quiet, if you think it's necessary. Victor nodded sharply. We go at first light, quick recon to the base of the icefall. Look for fresh tracks, old gear, anything that doesn't belong. Greta looked disgusted. You're turning this into a ghost hunt. Lena's voice hardened. No, I'm turning it into risk management, because right now the biggest risk is something we don't understand. Tenzing looked down into his cup and whispered something in Nepali that sounded like a prayer or a warning. I couldn't tell which. Later, when everyone went to their tents, I couldn't sleep. The camp's noises felt too deliberate. Every flap, every stove hiss, every distant cough. I lay there staring into darkness, thinking about the still image on the laptop, a radio screen glowing my name inside a frozen space. Around midnight, my own handheld radio, battery removed, switched off, made a faint clicking sound from inside my duffel bag. I sat upright instantly, heart punching my ribs. The clicking came again, like a button being pressed. I grabbed the radio and held it in both hands, staring at it as if it might bite me. The power was off. The battery was out. Then the speaker hissed. A whisper slid through, too soft, too intimate, like someone leaning close to my ear. Tomorrow, the voice breathed. Follow. My lungs locked. I couldn't move. Couldn't even swear. And then, as if someone had flipped a switch, silence returned. The radio was dead again, a piece of plastic in my hands. Outside, the wind rose, and somewhere far up the mountain, I heard a sound that didn't belong to wind or ice. A low, distant crack, followed by something like a long exhale. At dawn, Lena shook my tent and asked if I was ready. I didn't tell her about the whisper, because the moment I tried to form the words, I realized the worst part wasn't that something might be speaking. The worst part was that it sounded like it expected me to obey. And as we stepped toward the icefall, clipped into ropes with the sun barely touching the peaks, I saw fresh boot prints leading away from base camp. Too clean, too straight, heading into the maze of ice. But they weren't our prints. And they weren't yesterday's. They were brand new, as if someone had walked out in the night and wanted us to follow. We stepped into the Khumbu Icefall like men and women walking into the throat of a moving machine. That's the first lie people tell about Everest, that the danger is up there, higher on the mountain. The icefall is where the mountain reminds you it can kill you without ever letting you earn the view. It groans, it shifts, it rearranges itself while you're inside it. Seracs the size of office buildings lean over you like they're considering their options. Lena went first, steady and economical, probing with her ice axe, reading the lines of tension in the glacier the way a sailor reads waves. Tenzing followed close, rope running clean through his gloved hands. Victor came third, clipped in, breathing hard, the numbers man forced into the only math that matters up here. One step, then the next. I was fourth, carrying a small kit and my camera, still not filming, though my fingers kept finding the record button without pressing it. I told myself I wouldn't. I told myself some things deserved to remain unrecorded. We'd left before most of base camp woke, a tactical choice Lena made to avoid rumors. But rumors don't require witnesses. They grow in empty space. The boot prints started just beyond the last row of tents, sharp-edged in the frost crust, marching toward the icefall's entry like someone had walked with purpose, not confusion. They weren't wandering, they weren't dragging, they were too clean, too confident. Lena crouched and ran a gloved finger near the edge of one print without touching it. "Fresh," she said. Victor glanced up at the seracs. "From last night?" "Likely," Lena answered. Her voice stayed calm, but I could hear the pressure under it. Fresh prints meant someone had walked out after curfew, alone, in sub-zero temperatures, into a labyrinth of ladders and crevasses. Fresh prints meant intention. Tenzing studied the pattern. "One person," he said. "Not two," Victor muttered. "Maybe someone from another team." Lena didn't respond, because she was thinking the same thing I was. If it was another team, why no radio call? Why no headlamp scene? Why no noise? We moved deeper. The first ladders appeared, aluminum spans lashed together with rope and webbing, laid across gaps that swallowed light. Lena stepped onto the first ladder carefully, weight-centered, crampons placed like punctuation. The ladder flexed, the metal creaked, and I felt the familiar, sickening sensation of walking on something that was never meant to be a bridge. Halfway across, my radio hissed in my chest pocket. I froze. I had removed the battery. I had checked it 3 times. I had shoved it into my jacket anyway because leaving it behind felt wrong, like refusing a seatbelt because the car probably won't crash. The hiss became a whisper of static. Then, beneath it, a voice, low, intimate, too close. "Not that one," it said. My stomach dropped so hard my vision narrowed. Lena was already across. Victor was stepping onto the ladder behind her. Tenzing was waiting for my movement. I snapped my eyes down. My boots were on the ladder. The ladder's rungs were frosted. 2 rungs ahead, the lashing rope looked slightly frayed. "Victor, stop!" I blurted. Victor halted mid-step, annoyed. "What?" "Hold!" Lena ordered instantly, sensing the tone. She planted her axe, braced. I leaned down, forcing my hands not to shake, and inspected the lashing at the far end. It wasn't frayed. It was cut, cleanly, then retied just enough to hold weight until it didn't. My mouth went dry. "This ladder's been tampered with." Victor's face drained. "That's ridiculous." Lena didn't argue. She shifted her stance, then tapped the rung with the shaft of her axe. The ladder vibrated. The lashing on the far end slipped a fraction, a subtle movement that would have become catastrophic under full load. Lena's eyes narrowed to slits. "Back off," she said. "We reroute." Victor swallowed. "Who would do that?" Nobody answered him out loud. We moved to a second ladder a few meters left, one that sat lower, anchored with newer cord. Lena crossed first again, then set a carabiner to add a safety point. Tenzing followed. Victor went next, his movements suddenly careful, his earlier skepticism replaced by the quiet respect of someone who has just realized the universe is capable of malice. I went last, radio pressed cold against my chest, the whisper still echoing in my skull. We didn't mention what had spoken to me. We didn't mention how it had been right. We kept moving, because that's what people do when fear threatens to become truth. They exchange it for motion. Deeper inside the icefall, the air changed. It wasn't warmer, not exactly, but it felt less dead. Like the cold wasn't uniform anymore, as if pockets of different temperature existed where they shouldn't. Lena stopped at a junction where the route usually bent right. She studied the terrain. Ice towers, broken blocks, a narrow corridor that pinched between 2 seracs. Then she looked at the prints. They didn't follow the marked route. They cut left, into an older section of the icefall that teams avoided because it shifted too fast. The kind of place you didn't enter unless you were lost or invited. Victor stared at the prints like they were a sentence he couldn't translate. "This isn't the path." Tenzing's voice was low. "Someone wants us away from ropes, away from other eyes." Lena's jaw tightened. "We go only to the next safe point," she said. "No heroics. If we see anything unstable, we turn around." We followed the prints. The corridor narrowed, and the walls rose higher. The sound of base camp disappeared. Even the wind felt muted. Only the crunch of our crampons and the occasional distant groan of shifting ice remained. Then the ground beneath my left foot gave a faint, hollow thump. I stopped instantly. "Crevasse bridge," I said. Lena moved back toward me, eyes scanning. She tapped the snow with her axe. The sound repeated, hollow, a thin lid over a void. Victor's breath quickened. "We're still roped." "Yes," Lena said, "but rope doesn't stop a fall if all of us go." The prince crossed the bridge, single file, as if the person knew exactly where the strongest snow was. Lena studied them, then stepped forward, placing her foot in the exact center of each print, following the path like a tightrope walker. Halfway across, the snow bridge sighed. Not cracked, not collapsed. It sighed, like it flexed and settled, like something beneath had shifted position. Lena froze, weight balanced on one foot, axe planted. "Don't move," she said softly. The silence pressed in so hard I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Under my boots, the snow bridge felt alive, softening by the second. Then my radio hissed again, and the voice returned, calmer than before. "3 steps," it said. "Then stop." Lena didn't hear it. Nobody else did, but my throat tightened as if my body recognized the authority in the sound. I swallowed and said as evenly as I could, "Lena, take 3 steps. Then stop." Victor's head snapped toward me. "What?" Lena's eyes flicked to my face. She didn't ask why. She simply trusted the urgency. She shifted her weight and took 3 careful steps. The snow bridge held. She stopped. A second later, a muffled crack echoed beneath us, and the snow lid sagged behind her, exactly where her feet had been. A narrow slit opened, revealing darkness that seemed to drink the light. Victor's face went white. "How did you know?" I forced my voice steady. "Instinct. It was a lie. But it was a lie that kept us moving." We cleared the bridge and reached a slightly wider shelf of ice. Lena exhaled and adjusted the rope as if the act of tightening knots could tighten reality. The prince continued, now leading towards something that made no sense. A sheer ice wall with no obvious passage. The wall rose 20 feet, smooth and blue, like a frozen wave. No crampon marks, no rope, no ladder. The prince stopped at the base of it. Victor spread his hands. "That's it? He walked into a wall?" Tenzing stared at the wall longer than the rest of us. His eyes tracked small details. Tiny seams, hairline fractures, a shadow line that didn't match the sunlight. "There," he said, pointing. A seam ran vertically, almost invisible, unless you were looking for it. It wasn't natural. It was too straight, too deliberate, like a door line. Lena moved closer, tapping with her axe. The ice sounded solid until she hit the seam. Then the sound changed, duller, like the ice was thicker on one side and hollow on the other. Victor's voice dropped. "A cave." Tenzing shook his head slowly. "Not cave. Something made." Lena traced the seam with her gloved fingers. "We don't go in," she said immediately, more to convince herself than us. "We mark the location. We return to base camp. We bring more people." The words were sensible. They were the words of a leader who understood the thin margin between curiosity and obituary. But as she spoke, the air around the seam shimmered, not like heat waves, impossible in this cold, but like the air had thickness, like something invisible was exhaling from the crack. And then, from inside the wall, a faint light bloomed. It wasn't bright. It was a deep, cold blue, like bioluminescence under ice. It pulsed once, slow and deliberate. Victor stepped back instinctively. "What the hell is that?" Tenzing's lips moved in a whispering prayer. Lena's eyes hardened. "We're leaving," she said. My radio hissed. This time it wasn't my name. It was Eli's voice, so clear it made my skin crawl. "Don't," it said. "If you leave now, you won't find him again." I stared at the wall. "Find who?" I whispered before I could stop myself. Victor snapped, "What did you just say?" Lena turned toward me sharply. "Owen." I swallowed hard. I thought I heard." The wall seam widened a fraction of an inch. Not cracking, opening. The blue light intensified, and for a second I saw movement inside, something shifting behind the ice like a shadow behind frosted glass. Victor's voice rose, tight. "Lena, we need to go. Now." Lena's hand clenched around her axe. "We go," she repeated, but her body wasn't moving yet. She was watching the seam, watching the light, fighting the same thing I was fighting, the feeling that this was the answer to a question we were no longer allowed to ask. Then the seam opened wider, and cold air poured out, so cold it felt like it burned. A sound came from inside, not a roar, not a growl, a human breath, a long inhale, followed by a shaky exhale like someone waking from deep sleep. Victor stumbled backward. "No, no way!" Lena finally moved, grabbing Victor's harness and pulling him into position. "Back!" she ordered. "Slow! No running!" Tenzing's eyes were wide now, the calm cracked. "It is open," he whispered. "It should not open." My gaze was glued to the seam. The blue light flickered, and in that flicker I saw a shape, an arm, pale and rigid, reaching out like it was searching for the air. Then a voice, not over radio, but from inside the ice itself, weak and rasping. "Lena!" Lena froze. Victor's mouth fell open. "How does it know?" But Lena wasn't listening to Victor. Her face had gone utterly still, as if someone had drained the blood out of it. Because the voice wasn't calling her name like a guess. It was calling her the way someone calls an old friend. Tenzing grabbed Lena's sleeve. "No," he said firmly. "Do not answer." Lena's jaw tightened. Her eyes were locked on the seam. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice sharp. The answer came as a whisper through the crack. "You left me," the voice said. Lena's breathing stopped for a beat. Victor stared at her. "Lena, what is this?" Lena's voice turned cold. "We're done here," she said. "We turn around. Now." We backed away, careful, rope tight, eyes refusing to leave the seam. The blue light dimmed slightly, as if it sensed our retreat. Then my radio erupted with static so loud it made me flinch. And through the static, a sentence punched through with perfect clarity. "Run!" Lena didn't need explanation. She snapped, "Move!" We moved. Not a sprint. Running in the icefall is how you die, but fast, controlled, urgent. We retraced our steps toward the snow bridge, toward the corridor, toward the ladders we'd avoided. Behind us, the ice wall made a sound like a deep crack, starting at the roots of the glacier. The seracs above groaned, a slow, terrifying moan that meant weight was shifting. Victor was breathing like he'd swallowed panic. "What did we trigger?" Lena's voice was tight. "Doesn't matter. Keep moving." We reached the snow bridge area and slowed, forced by reality. Lena went first, placing her feet in the prints again. But now the bridge felt softer, as if the cold had lost its grip. Halfway across, a thunderous crack split the air. The bridge dipped. Snow slumped toward the opening slit. "Go!" Lena barked. Victor lunged forward, his crampon catching slightly. I grabbed his harness and shoved, not gently, and he stumbled onto firmer ground. Tenzing followed, rope sliding fast through his hands. I was last. The snow under my boots sagged again, and the bridge began to break in a slow-motion collapse, the kind that makes your body scream even if your mind stays calm. My radio hissed. "Jump!" the voice said. I didn't argue. I pushed off hard, leaping the last 2 feet towards solid ice. My crampons scraped, caught, and I slammed down on my knees, pain sparking up my legs. Behind me, the snow bridge gave way entirely with a muffled roar, dropping into the crevasse like a trapdoor opening. A gust of cold air surged up from the void, smelling strangely metallic, like old batteries. We stood on the far side, panting, staring at the gap that hadn't existed minutes ago. Victor's voice shook. That bridge was fine on the way in. Lena didn't answer. She was listening to the icefall. A second later, the sound came, a deep, rolling groan, followed by the unmistakable thunder of ice collapsing somewhere behind us, out of sight, but close enough to feel in our bones. A serac had fallen, or something had moved. We didn't wait to confirm which. We pushed through the corridor, reached the ladders, crossed them with hands that didn't feel like ours anymore, and finally stumbled out of the icefall into the open, where the wind hit us like an insult. Base camp appeared below, small and vulnerable against the glacier, as if it could be erased with one decision from above. We descended fast, minds racing. When we reached the edge of camp, Lena didn't slow down. She headed straight for the medical tent. Greta met us at the entrance, face tight. "Where the hell have you been?" Lena brushed past her. "Where is Eli?" Greta's eyes flicked between us, registering our pale faces, our breathing, the frantic energy. "He was stable," she said, sedated lightly. "He was right." Her words stopped, because the sleeping pad was empty. The blanket was folded neatly, placed as if someone had made the bed. The IV line lay on the floor, disconnected, the needle capped with medical precision, and on the canvas wall of the tent, written in dark marker that hadn't been there before, was a single sentence, printed like someone had practiced it. "It opens at night." Victor's voice cracked. "No, he can't be walking." Lena stared at the message, face rigid, eyes burning with a fury that felt like fear trying to become control. Tenzing whispered almost to himself, "Returned is not finished." I looked down at my jacket pocket, at the radio that shouldn't have spoken at all. It hissed one last time. And Eli's voice came through, close enough to feel like breath on my ear. "Base camp has a particular kind of terror that doesn't come from height, but from closeness. Too many people, too few places to hide, and one thin layer of fabric between you and a mountain that doesn't negotiate." Eli was gone, not dragged away, not missing in confusion. Gone with the neatness of someone who knew exactly how to disappear without leaving panic behind. The folded blanket was worse than a trail of blood. It felt intentional. It felt like a message written in manners. Lena stared at the words on the tent wall. "It opens at night," until I could see the muscles in her jaw jumping. Greta stepped forward, anger mixing with fear. "He was sedated. He shouldn't be walking. And if he is walking, he's hypoxic and confused. He'll walk straight into the icefall and die." Victor's eyes flicked around the tent, like he expected Eli to be hiding behind the stove. "Or he didn't walk out," he said, voice thin. "Maybe someone took him." Tenzing didn't move. His face had the stillness of someone who recognizes a pattern older than logic. "He returned," he murmured. "Now he is collected." Lena spun on us. "Lock down the camp," she ordered. "All teams, all leaders. No one leaves their tents alone. 2-person buddy system. Radios stay off unless emergency." Victor protested automatically. "That will cause panic." "It's already here," Lena snapped. "We're just giving it rules." The camp's radios were supposed to be our lifeline. Now they felt like open windows. As word traveled, faces appeared at tent flaps, tired eyes, frost-stiffened brows, people asking questions that had no safe answers. "What happened? Is someone missing? Did you see the icefall shift?" Lena moved through them like a ship's captain in fog, calm on the surface, everything inside tightening. She gathered team leaders in the mess tent and spoke without dramatics. A climber is missing from my medical tent. This is now a search and safety incident. No solo movement, no summit pushes, no rotations until we account for him. A German leader demanded details. A British leader demanded proof. An American leader asked if this was some kind of hoax. Lena didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. This mountain kills people who assume it's normal, she said evenly. Treat tonight as abnormal. You'll live longer. By late afternoon, the wind rose again. It wasn't a storm yet, but it had that sharp edge that said the weather was building in the dark, stacking itself behind the ridges like an argument. Victor pulled me aside near the comms tent. His skepticism had eroded into something restless and hungry. We need to watch the videos, he whispered. All of them, even corrupted. We can recover data. Lena overheard him. No, she said immediately. Victor's hands opened in frustration. Lena, come on! We're blind here. Lena stepped close, voice low enough that only we could hear. We're blind because whatever's doing this wants us looking where it points. Victor stared at her. You think the mountain is guiding us? Lena's eyes flicked toward the icefall. I think something is using our attention like a rope. Tenzing joined us silently. It learns, he said. The 3 words felt like a weight dropping onto my chest, because I remembered the radio whisper in my tent. Tomorrow. Follow. Dusk came early, a grey wash settling over the glacier. Headlamps snapped on across base camp like 100 small alarms. The camp tried to act normal. Stoves lit, dinner served, people talking too loudly to convince themselves they were fine. But the wind kept pressing, and every few minutes a radio somewhere would crackle once, as if it couldn't resist breathing. That's when we found the first sign. A Sherpa runner came sprinting from the edge of camp, breath steaming, eyes wide. He spoke quickly to Tenzing, who translated with a face that tightened as he spoke. Boot prints, Tenzing said. Fresh. Going into Icefall. 1 set. Lena's shoulders went rigid. Eli? Greta shook her head hard. No, you can't go after him at night. You'll lose more people. Victor's voice rose. So we do nothing. He'll die. Lena stared at the dark mouth of the icefall, and I watched the conflict play across her face. Duty, fear, calculation, something older and personal. Then she said, We go. Small team, short leash. We turn around the second it becomes unsafe. Greta stepped forward, furious. This is madness. Lena met her gaze. Madness is letting a sedated man walk into the icefall while we eat dinner and pretend we did everything we could. She turned to me. Owen, you come. My stomach clenched, but I nodded. Victor was already clipping gear to his harness with trembling efficiency. Tenzing checked ropes, knots, headlamp batteries with the quiet speed of someone preparing for a ritual he doesn't want to perform. We moved out under a sky that looked too close, stars sharp as broken glass. The icefall loomed ahead, darker than the surrounding night, its seracs cutting the moonlight into jagged shapes. The prints were easy to follow at first, clean steps through crusted snow. They didn't wander, they didn't hesitate. Eli was moving with purpose, and then, less than 100 meters from the icefall entrance, the prints changed. They became deeper, as if the person had gotten heavier, or tired, or was being pulled. Victor crouched, staring. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Tenzing's voice was barely audible. It is not only him walking. Lena's headlamp beam tracked the snow. For a second, the light caught something that made my skin crawl. A second set of impressions alongside Eli's prints. Not full boot marks, but long, faint drags, like something had moved next to him without feet. We clipped in and entered the icefall. The ladders were worse at night. Every rung felt like a decision. The crevasses beneath looked bottomless, eating headlamp beams without reflecting anything back. We pushed forward, following the prints away from the main route again, toward that older corridor we'd seen earlier. The air grew strangely still, as if the icefall itself was holding its breath. Halfway through the corridor, My radio hissed in my pocket. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to listen. But my hand moved anyway, as if the decision was made somewhere below thought. A whisper slid through the static. "Closer," it said. Lena didn't hear it, but she felt something. She paused, scanning the ice walls. Her headlamp beam caught the seam line in the distance, faintly glowing blue like a vein under skin. Victor's voice cracked. "It's open." And it was. Not wide, but wide enough to step into. The seam had parted into a narrow doorway, blue light pulsing from within, as if something inside had a heartbeat. At the base of the opening, Eli's boot prints stopped. Lena crouched, shining her light on the snow. "No exit prints," she said. Greta's voice echoed in my head. "He'll walk into the icefall and die." Victor stared at the opening, lips pale. "He went in." Tenzing whispered something in Nepali, then looked at Lena. "If you go inside, it will speak with faces you miss." Lena didn't look away from the blue light. "It already did," she said, so quietly I almost missed it. She clipped her tether to an ice screw and looked back at us. "We do not separate. We do not go deep. We go in far enough to retrieve Eli if he's reachable. If anything shifts, anything, we back out." Victor nodded too fast. Tenzing nodded once, reluctant. I swallowed and nodded because there was nothing else to do but follow. We stepped through. The cold inside was different. It wasn't the sharp, honest cold of high altitude. It was a cold that felt curated, steady, controlled, like the inside of a freezer that never lost power. The blue light didn't come from a lamp. It came from the ice itself, glowing faintly from within like bioluminescent algae trapped under a frozen lake. The walls were smooth, almost polished, as if touched by hands over time. And the air carried a smell that made my stomach turn. Old plastic, faint ozone, and something metallic, like the inside of a radio after it's been running too long. We moved slowly, headlamps casting pale cones that barely mattered against the blue. 10 steps in, Victor froze. I followed his gaze. Shapes in the walls, human shapes, not bodies lying on the ground, bodies embedded in the ice, upright and angled, as if they'd been pressed into it gently and left there. Faces visible beneath a thin layer of frost, eyes closed, expressions neutral. Preserved, not like the grim, public markers Everest is known for. These weren't exposed to the elements. These were stored. Victor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Lena's voice was tight, controlled. "Do not touch anything," she said. Tenzing's eyes were wide with something like grief. "Kept," he whispered. Then the ice corridor widened into a chamber. At the center of it, on a smooth shelf of ice, sat Eli Rourke. He was upright, legs folded under him, hands resting on his knees like someone waiting for a meeting to begin. His face was calm, too calm. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, half in shadow, was another figure, taller, broader, wrapped in layers of old gear, face obscured by frost and a hood. Lena's headlamp beam trembled as it landed on the figure. The hooded person lifted their head slightly, and a voice came out that didn't match the body it came from. "Lena," it said, gentle as a memory. Lena's breathing caught. "No," she whispered. Victor looked between Lena and the figure. "You know that voice." The figure took one slow step forward. Ice didn't crunch under its boots. It moved like the floor was soft. "You left me," it said again. Lena's face tightened with pain. "You're not him." The figure tilted its head. "Then why does it hurt?" My radio hissed so softly it felt like it was whispering directly into my skull. "You came for him," it said. I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on Eli. His eyelids fluttered as if he was waking. "Eli," Lena said, voice firm, forcing reality into the room. "We're taking you out. Stand up." Eli's eyes opened slowly, and for a moment they looked normal, human, frightened, exhausted. Relief flickered across his face when he saw us. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. Victor stepped forward instinctively, and Lena grabbed his harness hard. "Stay!" she hissed. Eli's gaze slid past us, toward the ice wall behind. "It's awake," he said. "It's so awake." Tenzing's voice shook, but he held it together. "Eli, come." Eli began to stand, moving stiffly like someone whose joints had forgotten how to function. Lena stepped toward him, careful, and reached for his arm. The moment her glove touched his sleeve, the blue light surged, brighter, pulsing faster. The chamber seemed to inhale. The hooded figure's voice changed, becoming sharper, layered, like more than one throat speaking at once. "Choose," it said. Lena froze. Choose what? The ice behind Eli shimmered, and one of the preserved faces in the wall became visible in our headlamp beams, an unmistakable human face, eyes closed, lips slightly parted. Victor whispered, That's Mark. Eli's teammate, a man who had vanished with him. Lena's voice went raw. "You have him." The chamber's blue light throbbed like a warning. "Take one," the layered voice said. "Leave one." Victor turned toward Lena, horror flooding his expression. No, that's not." Lena's eyes darted between Eli, alive and trembling, and the face in the wall, still, preserved, unreachable. Tenzing grabbed Lena's arm. "Do not bargain," he said, voice urgent. "It will take more." Eli's voice broke. "If you take me, it will keep him forever." Victor stepped forward again, desperate. "We can't leave a man." The ice under our boots shifted. A deep groan rolled through the chamber, the sound of mass moving, of a glacier adjusting its spine. Fine cracks spidered across the ceiling above us, dusting frost down like ash. Lena's decision snapped into place like a carabiner locking. "We take the living," she said, and yanked Eli toward her. "Now." The chamber reacted instantly. The blue light flared so bright it made our headlamps irrelevant. The preserved faces in the walls seemed to sharpen, as if the ice was briefly becoming glass, and from every direction voices began to whisper. Names, pleas, fragments of radio calls, the sound of people dying and calling for help. Victor clapped his hands over his ears, stumbling. "Make it stop!" Tenzing dragged him toward the doorway. "Move! Move!" Lena half-carried Eli, whose legs buckled as if gravity had tripled. I stayed close behind, one hand on the rope, the other gripping my radio through my jacket like holding it could hold the world together. As we neared the doorway, the hooded figure stepped in front of us. Up close, it was wrong. Not in a supernatural way, but in a deeply physical way. The layers of clothing were real, the ice on them real, but the proportions were slightly off, like someone had assembled a person from memory and got the measurements wrong. It raised a hand, not threatening, almost gentle, and it spoke in my own voice. "Owen," it said, "don't look up." My blood went cold, because it wasn't repeating a warning anymore. It was practicing. Lena shoved past it, slamming her shoulder into its chest. The figure didn't fall. It simply moved aside like it allowed us through. We spilled out of the doorway into the icefall corridor, dragging Eli with us. The seam behind us began to narrow, the blue light dimming, as if the door was exhaling shut. But before it closed, Eli twisted his head back and screamed, not in fear, but in grief. "I'm sorry!" he shouted into the blue. "I'm sorry!" The seam snapped almost fully shut, leaving only a thin crack of light, and in that crack a final whisper escaped, soft, satisfied. Returned. Then darkness. We didn't stop moving. The icefall felt angrier on the way back. The groans were louder, closer. The air seemed to vibrate with instability. We crossed ladders with shaking hands, hauled Eli over rungs, half-dragged him across ice shelves while his breathing came in ragged pulls. Behind us once, we heard a sound like a deep crack tearing through the glacier's chest, then another, then a rolling thunder that made the ice beneath our feet tremble. "Serac!" Lena shouted. We ran, controlled, frantic, through a section we'd crossed earlier, not caring about elegance, only survival. The icefall answered with noise, a roar like a collapsing city, ice blocks slamming into each other, snow blasting through the corridor in a white wave. We dove behind an ice buttress just as a cascade of shattered ice swept across the path we'd been on seconds earlier. The impact shook the world, and for a moment I thought the entire icefall was coming down on top of us. When the snow cloud cleared, the route behind us was gone, buried, rearranged, erased. Victor was sobbing without sound, eyes wide. Tenzing pressed his forehead briefly to the ice, whispering thanks to something I couldn't name. Lena didn't let herself breathe relief. She just hauled Eli up again and forced him forward with a grip that said, "Live first, feel later." We staggered out of the icefall at the edge of base camp as the first true gusts of a storm began to hit, wind snapping tents, snow skittering across the glacier like shards of paper. People surged toward us, shouting questions, hands reaching for Eli. Greta pushed through them, fury and relief colliding on her face. "You brought him back," she said, voice tight. Lena didn't answer. She handed Eli off like delivering something fragile that might shatter if she held it another second. Greta rushed Eli into the medical tent, slamming the flap shut behind her. Victor leaned over, hands on knees, vomiting into the snow. Tenzing stood apart, staring toward the icefall with an expression that looked like mourning. Lena turned to me. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was firm. "We evacuate," she said, "tonight. As soon as weather allows movement to lower camps. This expedition is over." Victor looked up, face streaked, and didn't argue, but the storm didn't care about our decisions. By midnight, the wind was howling, hammering base camp with a force that made tents bow and snap. Snow drove sideways. Visibility dropped to a few meters. Helicopter extraction became impossible. Moving up or down the glacier became a risk calculation that leaned toward death. Inside the medical tent, Eli drifted in and out of consciousness. Greta kept him warm, fed, medicated. Every so often he would wake and whisper phrases that made no sense until you listened closely. "It learns your voice," he murmured once. Greta leaned in. "What learns?" Eli's eyes found me across the tent, and a chill ran through me at the recognition there. "It doesn't need to keep you," he whispered. "It only needs to let you leave. Carrying it." Lena stood at the far edge of the tent, shoulders rigid, staring at the canvas wall where the message had been written. "It opens at night." I realized with a slow dread that the marker ink was still wet in one corner, as if it had been written recently, despite the hours that had passed. And then my radio, sitting on a crate with its battery removed, hissed again. Everyone froze. The speaker crackled softly, and a voice came through, smooth, familiar, impossible. "Lena," it said gently, "you left me." Lena's face tightened. She didn't answer. The voice shifted, turning its attention like a spotlight. "Owen," it said in my own tone, "tell them what you saw." My throat locked. The tent felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the mountain itself had leaned down to listen. Eli's hand shot out and grabbed my sleeve with surprising strength. "Don't," he rasped. "If you answer, it keeps a piece of you." I stared at the radio, heart hammering, and understood something terrible. The door in the icefall didn't close when we left. It traveled. It followed. And somewhere beyond the storm's roar, beyond the tents, beyond the edge of base camp, the mountain waited in perfect patience for the next night, and the next voice, and the next name it could learn. When morning finally came, thin and grey, we began the slow, careful retreat down the valley, alive, exhausted, and quieter than any expedition team had a right to be. Eli was carried. Victor walked like a man who'd seen too much. Tenzing didn't look back. Lena walked beside me for a long time without speaking. Then, without turning her head, she said, "Owen, if this ever speaks again." I swallowed. "What?" Her voice was barely above the wind. "You don't answer." I nodded, because it was the only promise left that still felt like it might matter. And behind us, far up the glacier, the icefall groaned, slow, deep, and almost satisfied, like a door settling gently back into its frame.